The world is shifting as superpowers face off and tensions reach new heights. Every day, the risk of a clash in the Pacific grows. But China has pulled out something that has shocked the whole world. Not tanks or missiles, but something more cunning. Something that could decide who will rule the seas in a future war, and who will fear a devastating strike from a place that didn't even exist until recently. Welcome to Beyond Borders, where we reveal hidden connections, power plays, and world-shaping conflicts. Today, I will show you the story of one of the largest construction operations in modern history. A story that doesn't take place on land, but right in the middle of the sea. We'll discuss what China is building, why, the weapons and airfields involved, and the impact on the United States, Taiwan, and the region. Some claim these constructions could reshape the world map and even determine if war occurs. And one more important thing, those islands are almost like aircraft carriers for China. Unsinkable fortresses to launch, attack, or monitor the whole sea. Why is China building islands? Let's start with the basics. Why is China even building islands in the middle of the sea? It's because the South China Sea is vital. More than 40% of the world's maritime trade passes through there. Each day, tons of oil, gas, and goods move through, plus massive oil and gas reserves lie beneath the sea. But China doesn't want it just for the economy. It wants it as a strategic shield and a tool that, in war, could help China control the South China Sea and hinder American access, especially near the Philippines or Taiwan. Where is China building islands? China is mainly building islands in the Spratly and Paracel Islands, and between them stretches a belt of coral reefs, atolls, and shoals of China. It's more than 1,000 kilometers long, from southern Hainan Island nearly to Malaysia and the Philippines. The biggest construction frenzy took place in the Spratly Islands. 10 years ago, there were only small reefs there. Some rose a few meters above water at low tide, while others were submerged. But China turned all into fortresses. China added or built more than 3,200 hectares of new land there. That's about 32 million square meters, equal to more than 4,500 football fields. The largest and most famous Spratly Islands are Fiery Cross Reef, Subi Reef, and Mischief Reef. Each of them has a long runway of about 3,000 meters, large docks for warships, radar stations, ammunition depots, and a dense network of buildings and bunkers. But China is also building smaller islands. Besides the 3 large ones, it has at least 4 smaller islands with bases: Hughes, Gavin, Johnson South, and Quarteron Reefs. These smaller islands lack large airports but have radars, defense systems, and crew barracks. Altogether, we're talking about approximately 7 to 10 actively used islands in the Spratlys. But China has used construction equipment on over 20 reefs. Some have embankments, others have small buildings. Now the Paracel Islands, located nearer the Chinese coast. China isn't creating new islands from scratch, but is greatly expanding existing ones. For example, Woody Island, Yongqingdao, already has 2 runways. A large port, HQ-9 missile systems. The Paracels are closer to Hainan, about 350 kilometers from the Chinese coast. They serve China as a forward base for the entire South China Sea. If we looked at the map from above, the Chinese islands stretch from north to south like a fortress belt, from the Paracel Islands near Hainan to the Spratly Islands, just a few hundred kilometers from the Philippines and Malaysia. This belt lets China extend its reach hundreds of kilometers offshore, build an A2AD zone, and cover nearly the entire South China Sea. Never before has anyone in peacetime built so much new territory at sea in such a strategic area and armed it with missiles, radars, and bunkers. China is redrawing sea borders and possibly shifting Pacific power. What do these islands look like? They're more than just piles of sand. They have runways up to 3,000 meters long, That means fighter jets, bombers, or tankers can land there. They have built ports for warships there. Large docks where they can refuel, repair, or hide from satellites. Radar domes on the islands track all movement, while buildings conceal ammunition depots. China is also deploying electronic warfare systems that can jam enemy radar and communications. And everything is protected by concrete walls and bunkers. The video's not over. Please subscribe, like, or send a super thanks. That's a small financial gift you can use to support my work. Thank you very much. Let's continue. What weapons is China deploying there? Weapons are the main focus on these islands. China has stationed advanced anti-aircraft missiles with over 200-kilometer range and anti-ship missiles that can destroy aircraft carriers, coastal artillery, short-range rocket launchers. These weapons can block a large area of sea. Every American ship or plane would have to stay away or risk being hit. That's why American generals say that China is building a defensive zone here to deny the enemy entry and movement. That means anti-access/area denial. Simply put, it's a zone where the American military can't safely get in. How do these islands change the balance? All of this changes the balance of power in the Pacific. 10 years ago, China had a weak navy. Today, it is the largest in the world by number. And besides ships, it also has islands. And those are closer to the Philippines, Vietnam, and also to Taiwan. If conflict broke out, the islands would serve China as airplane runways, drone bases, and radar stations with hundreds of kilometers range. American ships would first have to neutralize the islands, and that could cost enormous losses. Some analysts say that if China attacks Taiwan, the islands could slow or complicate the American advance, though they may not fully block United States access. China began building these artificial islands around 2013 when it massively imported sand and created new land, especially in the Spratly area. Although the main phase of construction ended around 2016, military facilities, runways, aircraft shelters, and radars are still being added to the islands. What does this mean for the United States of America? America is closely monitoring China's artificial islands, as Pacific navigation freedom is crucial for the United States of America. The entire American strategy since World War II is based on the fact that American warships and aircraft can move freely across the ocean. No major power should block them, not Russia, China, or anyone. But the Chinese islands threaten this rule. China claims that around those islands it has 12 nautical miles of its own sea, and that all foreign warships must announce their entry. The United States of America denies that. International law says these artificial islands cannot generate new territorial waters. That's why American destroyers conduct regular freedom of navigation patrols. They sail just a few kilometers from the Chinese islands, signaling to the world that these waters are not China's internal territory. But these American voyages are becoming increasingly dangerous. Chinese ships often cross their course, sometimes literally just a few dozen meters away. Both sides shout warnings over radios. One small mistake can cause an incident. It's not just ships. American reconnaissance planes fly near these islands, and China warns them to leave. In recent years, Chinese fighter jets have repeatedly flown dangerously close to American aircraft. The planes were at times only a few meters apart. The Americans say these maneuvers are irresponsible and dangerous, warning they could lead to disaster. Militarily, the main issue is the range of Chinese weapons. From those islands, China can monitor American ships hundreds of kilometers away, launch anti-ship missiles at aircraft carriers, and jam American communications and radars. This forces the United States to shift its strategy. American admirals know the Chinese islands form an A2AD zone designed to block enemy access and movement, making it risky for the American fleet to sail there. In the event of war, they could serve as bases for aircraft, ships, or missiles that would threaten American forces operating in the South China Sea. This means American aircraft carriers would need to stay farther away to avoid first-wave attacks. shorter range for aircraft and longer supply routes would all weaken American firepower. These islands could be an advantage for China if it wanted to put pressure on its neighbors, Philippines, Vietnam, or Malaysia. And although they are not directly near Taiwan, they can provide China with better radar coverage, expanded surveillance capabilities, and logistical support. That's why some analysts say that if China attacked Taiwan, it could use these islands as a base or supplementary outposts, but not as a solid barricade that would completely cut the United States off from Taiwan. Rather as a threat that would cost America more time, effort, and money to get closer to Taiwan. This is precisely the Pentagon's nightmare. Every extra Chinese missile, base, or radar will lengthen America's path to Taiwan. If America failed to get involved in time, it risked losing credibility as an Asian power. But all this comes at a high cost. The United States is already spending billions of dollars on new stealth bombers, hypersonic weapons, naval drones, and air defense systems against Chinese missiles. China is pushing America into an arms race that could be extremely expensive. And Washington is concerned that, in terms of economic exhaustion, the scenario that the Soviet Union experienced during the Cold War could repeat itself. That's why, for the United States, it's about more than just a few islands. It's about defending freedom of the seas and keeping China in check. Since the Chinese islands are more than sand and concrete, they play a crucial role in determining who will control the Pacific Ocean. What does this mean for Taiwan? If any country is watching China's artificial islands closely, it's Taiwan. Taiwan knows those islands are more than just sand. They're military bases, and although not near Taiwan, they still impact the region's power balance. China now claims that Taiwan belongs to it, that it's a breakaway province, and that if it ever decides to, it will use force to take control of Taiwan again. Chinese artificial islands are actually farther from Taiwan than the Chinese mainland coast. But they let China boost its military in the South China Sea, widen radar coverage, and pressure neighbors. These islands act as bases with radar stations monitoring all movement in a wide area. Some of them can help monitor areas closer to Taiwan, or provide support for refueling aircraft or storing ammunition. This means that in the event of war, China could have more options to respond quickly or conduct operations in the southern parts of the region. That's why Taiwan is massively investing in missile defense shields, fighter jets, and its own missiles that could strike Chinese bases. These Chinese islands are concrete fortresses shielded by bunkers and could survive several strikes before Taiwan could destroy them. Another point. If China attacks Taiwan, the United States must help. While the Chinese islands aren't directly on the United States-Taiwan route, they could still complicate United States operations in the South China Sea. Missile systems from these islands could threaten American ships, especially if the United States decided to approach from the direction of the Philippines or from the southern seas. That's why several analysts say that if China attacked Taiwan, the islands could help slow down or complicate the American advance. Not completely block the way, but increase the risk, cost, and time America would need to intervene. For Taiwan, this means that the Chinese islands reduce the room for maneuver in the region. They are bringing the military threat closer to its shores, at least in terms of Chinese influence. They're making Taiwan a bigger target in a major conflict, which is why Taiwan urges the world for support. Help us, don't leave us alone in this. The Chinese islands prove Beijing is serious about its plan. It's getting ready for the day it decides to strike Taiwan without waiting any longer. Has anyone ever done anything like this before, you might ask yourself? Is what China is doing completely new? Has anyone in history tried building islands and fortresses in the ocean? Actually, this has happened before. During World War II, the Japanese built powerful bases on atoll islands in the Pacific. There were runways, fuel depots, and artillery batteries there. They were sea fortresses built on natural islands, not on reefs that never rose above the surface. Americans also fortified islands like Wake and Midway after the war, but they still used natural islands. They didn't make them artificially. China is going further, creating islands where none existed. They bring in millions of tons of sand, concrete, and steel, and they turn a coral reef into an airport, a port, or a missile base. No similar project exists in peacetime. No other country has built a chain of artificial military fortresses this far from its coast. Video's not over. Please subscribe, like, or send a super thanks if you'd like. That's a small financial gift you can use to support my work. Thank you very much. Let's continue. How does this impact other countries nearby? The Chinese islands are an issue for more than just America. The Philippines face direct pressure. Chinese ships are spraying water cannons at Filipino ships there, blocking the supply of Filipino soldiers on the reefs. That's why the Philippines are aligning with the United States again, renewing military agreements for American protection. Vietnam is another country that has its own claims. Vietnam is also building small bases on the Spratly Islands. But the Chinese islands are bigger, stronger, and much more heavily armed. Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia. They all have their own economic waters, where China suddenly sends patrols and says this sea is ours. China is creating a buffer zone this way, and it's taking space, resources, and even political sovereignty from its neighbors. What do international institutions say about it, and what does the world say? In 2016, the International Court of Justice in The Hague ruled that China does not have the right to claim the entire South China Sea as its own. Artificial islands don't grant 12 nautical miles of territorial waters. China, however, rejects this ruling. And it continues to build the islands. Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is still negotiating with China. They want an agreement that would stop further militarization of the sea. But China is not backing down yet. Those islands are its ace up its sleeve, and for now the world is just watching. The economic dimension of the islands. The islands are also an economic weapon. There are huge reserves of oil and gas under the South China Sea. Estimates suggest up to 11 billion barrels of oil and hundreds of trillions of cubic feet of gas. And in addition, 40% of the world's maritime trade passes through this sea. Tankers and container ships sail there daily. China aims to control the trade routes. If a war broke out, China could say no more ships will pass through. And that way, it would economically strangle not only Taiwan, but the whole world. Fishing is a major industry, with millions earning a living from fish near the Spratly Islands. And China claims this sea is ours. For the neighbors, it's a disaster because they're losing their catches, and also money. Conclusion: China represents the world. Today it's clear that China is not just building islands. It's creating a new world order. Those islands symbolize it. A symbol that China wants to change maps, set the rules, and build strongholds meant to stop America. And in the event of war, these islands could determine how quickly and with what force the United States can reach Taiwan. They wouldn't cut America off entirely, but could make things complicated. China has chosen a path where the fighting is no longer just on land, but also in the middle of the sea, and where the sea turns into a concrete fortress full of radars, airplanes, and missiles. There's only one question: how long until this game switches from practice to live weapons? I'm interested in your opinion. Write in the comments whether you think China has the right to build these islands. Thank you for being with us on the Beyond Borders channel. Keep following us so you don't miss the stories and connections that move the world. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and if you want to support my work, you can also use super thanks. Here's a little gift on YouTube. See you next time.